When we are drawing 2D shapes, we need to remember that because we are usually working freehand, we still need to work with a ruler. But let's have a look at the square and the rectangle first. You will obviously be using a ruler, but if we have a look at this square here, if I were to draw that using my ruler, remember, I'm not using a ruler now, but you will be using in your tests and in your classwork. So if I know that this is what a square looks like, I need to try and make my sides equal to each other, because we know the properties of a square, and the properties of squares are that all the sides are equal. So because we are drawing we are drawing with a ruler, but our drawings may not be as accurate as a computerized drawing would be, what we now need to do is label our shapes when we draw them, so that we are showing our teachers that we know that all the sides of a square are equal. So that is what we do with our square. We indicate that all the sides are equal by putting a line on each of the sides, and that indicates that all the sides are equal to each other. Right, so that is the first thing that we need to do. The second thing that we need to do is indicate if there is anything special about our angles. So we know that in a square, all the angles are right angles. So this is what we do to indicate that our angles are all right angles in our square. So even though your angles that you've drawn may not be exactly right angles, like these are here, we will just indicate that they are right angles by putting these little squares in the corners. Right. So that is very important for us to do. What we need to do now is indicate parallel lines. So we know that opposite sides are parallel in a square. So we put those little arrows there to indicate that this side and this side are parallel to each other. And then we put two arrows on the other two opposite sides to indicate that those sides are also parallel to each other. So we obviously do the same in our drawings. So these arrows are to indicate that the lines are parallel to each other. Right. So those are the most important things. Remember that we need to work with our sides, we need to work with parallel sides, we need to work with equal sides. We need to work with angles and whether any of our angles are equal and what they would be equal to. If they are 90 degrees, then we do what we've done here. Now let's have a look at our lines of symmetry. So when we are working with squares, we know that because a square is a regular polygon that has 4 equal sides and 4 equal angles, we have 4 lines of symmetry in our square. And it's important to know, obviously, where those lines of symmetry are. So if we divide our square in half over there, we will end up with a mirror image on either side of that line. And that makes this line here a line of symmetry. And if we draw a line of symmetry down the middle there, that would make this side here and this side here also mirror images of each other. So that's another line of symmetry. And then we have another line of symmetry from corner to corner, or rather angle to angle. So our opposite angles, we join our opposite angles together with a line. That will also be a line of symmetry. So we usually draw our lines of symmetry with dotted lines. So we would then do that in our drawing as well. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, So that's meant to be a dotted line there. But just to show you more clearly where they are, I'll draw solid lines. Right, so there are your 4 lines of symmetry in your square. So now let's have a look at our rectangle. In the same way, we need, with our square, we need to know what the properties of our rectangle are. So we know that opposite sides are equal. So again, we draw a line on each of those opposite sides. And with our rectangle, we're not going to put one line on each side. We are going to put one line on the opposite sides that are equal and 2 lines on the other 2 sides, the other 2 opposite sides that are equal. Right, so now we've dealt with our lines in terms of equivalence. Let's now talk about parallel lines or parallel sides. So we know that opposite sides are also parallel. So we'll put 2 arrows there to indicate that those 2 sides are parallel to each other, and 1 arrow on these 2 sides to indicate that those 2 sides are parallel to each other. Right, and then we know that in a rectangle, all 4 sides are equal to each other, and all 4 sides have right angles, so we indicate that as well. Right, so I don't know if you can see those clearly. Let me just do them in a different color. So there we go. So we've got our parallel lines, we've got our equal sides, and we've dealt with our angles as well. So now what we need to do is work with our lines of symmetry. So in a rectangle, we have got 2 lines of symmetry. We've got one there, one horizontal line of symmetry in the middle, and one vertical line of symmetry in the middle there. So if we were now to draw our own rectangle with a ruler, obviously, we try and make these 2 sides equal and those 2 sides equal. We indicate that all these angles are right angles, and we indicate that opposite sides are parallel. So these are the most important signs that you need to use to label your shapes when you are drawing them. Let's have a look at the lines of symmetry of our kite, our rhombus, and our equilateral triangle. We will also have a look at the lines of symmetry of a trapezium that I will draw just now. So the lines of symmetry in a kite, let's start with. Let's first have a look at how we would label this kite if we were to draw this kite in a test using just a pencil and a ruler. So we know that the top 2 sides and the bottom 2 sides of our kite are equal. So we say there are 2 pairs of adjacent sides that are equal. So these 2 sides here at the top are adjacent to each other, and these 2 sides at the bottom are adjacent to each other because they share a common vertex. Right, so we label those 2. Let's just make this more clear. I've rubbed some of that out, that's okay. So let's just make that more clear. Those 2 adjacent sides are equal and the bottom 2 adjacent sides are equal. Right, so now what we need to indicate is something to do with maybe our angles. So we know that these 2 angles are equal to each other, and we know that these 2 angles are not equal to each other. So we indicate that by putting one of these curved lines on the 2 angles that are equal to each other. We've put 2 curved lines on the one angle that isn't equal to any of the other angles, and 3 curved lines on the other angle to indicate that that angle is also different to all the other angles. Right, so that helps us and we have got no parallel lines or parallel sides in our kite. So that helps us just to understand how we label our 2D shapes when we are drawing them. And let's now have a look at our lines of symmetry. A kite only has one line of symmetry going down the middle there. So that's how we would indicate that a kite has one line of symmetry. We just draw in our dotted line. It is usually a dotted line, but I'm sure that your teacher will specify when they are asking the question in the test. Right, so that is our kite. Let's have a look at our rhombus. In a rhombus, we know that all four sides are equal. So we indicate that by putting one line on each of our sides. We know that our opposite sides are equal. So we put one curved line on one pair of our opposite sides, and we'll put two curved lines on the other pair of opposite angles. Right, so that helps us with that. And we also know that opposite sides are parallel in our rhombus. So we put one arrow there and one arrow there. We'll put two arrows there and two arrows there to indicate our parallel lines. Right, so that's just to help you in terms of labeling your rhombus when you are drawing it. Let's now have a look at our lines of symmetry. We have got two lines of symmetry in a rhombus. We have got lines of symmetry going from both our angles, from both sets of angles. So one line going from these two angles, which are equal to each other, and then the other line going from the other two, joining the other two angles that are equal to each other. So those two are our lines of symmetry for the rhombus. Let's now have a look at our equilateral triangle. We know that in an equilateral triangle, all three angles are equal to each other, or equal to one another rather. So we just indicate that by putting one curved line on each of our angles. We know that in an equilateral triangle, all three sides are equal as well, and none of our sides are parallel when we are working with triangles. So that's perfect. Right. Now what we need to work with is our lines of symmetry. So in an equilateral triangle, we have got three lines of symmetry going from each angle to the middle of the opposite side. Right, so you will also use a ruler to indicate these lines of symmetry. So those are your three lines of symmetry for your equilateral triangle. Right, now let's have a look at our trapezium. So I'm going to draw a freehand trapezium. So you would obviously use a ruler. So there we go. We've got a trapezium, and we know that our trapezium doesn't have any lines of symmetry, but just to show you how we would work with our trapezium in terms of labeling it. So we know that none of our sides are equal in the trapezium, so we indicate that by putting a different number of lines on each of our sides, and we know that none of our angles are equal either. So we put a different number of curved lines. We can put 3 there, 2 there, and 4 there. Right, so we put a different number of curved lines on each of our angles to indicate that they are not equal to each other. And we do not have any parallel lines in our trapezium, and we've got no lines of symmetry. So that's how you would label your trapezium. And it's the same thing when we are working with a scalene triangle. So a scalene triangle has, so none of our sides are equal and none of our angles are equal. So we will indicate that by putting a different number of lines on each of our sides, and indicate that by putting a different number of curved lines on each of our angles. Right, and then we do have no lines of symmetry. With our isosceles triangle, we would indicate that these two sides are equal, and those two angles are equal. So we can put 2 lines there if we'd like, and then two curved lines there to indicate that that angle is different to these bottom 2 angles. So this should give you an idea of how to label your 2D shapes when you are drawing them. And just remember that if you are asked to insert your lines of symmetry, usually you use a dotted line to indicate your lines of symmetry. So that we need to know our properties of our 2D shapes in order to know where the lines of symmetry goes and how many lines of symmetry each of our 2D shapes have. But so, for example, with our isosceles triangle here, we only have 1 line of symmetry, and that's down the middle. So we would indicate that by putting our line of symmetry right down the middle there.